We're live? Dang. Okay, Small Axe Talks. I am here today with Karen Crouse, who is a New York Times reporter as well as author of a book called Norwich, One Tiny Vermont's Town's Secret to Happiness and Excellence. Thank you for doing this with me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. I am happy to talk about the lessons learned in Norwich anytime.
Yeah, hell yeah. So before we got on camera here, I mentioned to you that I'm not like a huge sports person,
Yeah.
honestly, but I really enjoyed reading this book.
Thank
and
you.
Particularly because it's kind of how I'm trying to live my life or want to live my life. And I think how a lot of people in this country would like to live a
Right.
more kind of balanced, holistic life. So if we can, though, before we get into talking about the book, can we talk a little bit about your life?
Sure.
And,
So I love to hear people say that they're not really into sports, but
Yeah.
they like something that I've written, because to me, that's the highest compliment you can pay me. I was an athlete my entire life. I swam through college and I always loved to write. So my path seemed like it was almost foreordained. But I recognize that for a lot of people, there's this idea that sports are very nerdy. You have to have insider knowledge. They're all about very particular language and numbers. And there is this sense that if I don't know anything about football or hockey or golf, how can I possibly enjoy a story about any of those sports? But for me, I always, having grown up an elite athlete, I saw that it isn't all unicorns and roses and rainbows. There is really another side of it that's quite difficult and quite challenging, as we're finding out from all of the news that's being made. We were talking just a few minutes ago about Andrew Luck and his sudden retirement. I saw the toll that elite level sports took on people. So when I was at college, and I vowed to myself that when I got into the real world writing about sports, I was going to try to present these performers as people first and very holistically, so that you didn't really need to know anything about the sport that they participated in to appreciate and like their story. And so that's what I've set out to do. And I've over the years received many emails and feedback from readers saying, oh, well, my husband is the one who reads the sports section, but I saw your story on Gracie Gold, the figure skater, and read it, and I just loved it. So I'm going to look for your byline now.
Really?
And to me, that's so satisfying, because I want to demystify sports. We may never understand what it's like to be Tom Brady, or how to hit a serve like Serena Williams, or to win 15 majors like Tiger Woods, but they all are human beings first.
Yeah.
So they have many of the same insecurities and things that would make them, and vulnerabilities that would make them very relatable to all of us.
Yeah.
And so that's what I've always set out to do, is pull back the stereotype or the caricature and show the person in full, as a fully actualized human being with the frailties and vulnerabilities that suggests.
Well, I think a lot of people, whatever you're watching, whatever sport it is, like most people, you see like the end result, whether it's
Right.
like amazing, fantastic,
Right.
or amazing failures. But I
Right.
think that's like something that's more interesting, is even if I'm watching something like a Netflix documentary, the more interesting part is like the work that these people have put in to get to where they are, and the backstory.
So I grew up in swimming, wanting to be an Olympian. I was never got to that point, but
You wanted to be an Olympic
I
athlete,
wanted
though?
so much to be
Really?
an Olympian. And I grew up in Santa Clara, California in the 70s, at a time when it was the epicenter for swimming, not only in the United States, but in the world. People would come
Okay.
from all over and lodge with Santa Clara residents so that they could train at Santa Clara Swim Club with
Wow.
George Haynes. So I had this really amazing childhood where I would see Olympic gold medalists on the deck every day. And it almost, in a weird way, normalized what is this extraordinary achievement. I didn't realize how lucky I was until I got out into the real world and met people who honestly had never even met an Olympian.
Wow.
And I had just been around them every day of my childhood. And so what that does is it feeds this idea, and this is what I found in Norwich for sure, where you think that it's pretty normal to become an Olympian. It takes it from something that seems unattainable and makes it seem not only attainable but actually normal. These people all are training in the same pool with the same coaches. They've grown up to be Olympians. Why can't I? And that's actually what I found in Norwich, which is a town of 3,000 people. And it has put an Olympian on every Winter Games team in the U.S., but 2 since 1984.
Wow.
And during that time has also put 2 Summer Olympians on teams. So how does a town of 3,000 people achieve this? Well, it's done by, you have these Olympians who by and by still live in the community. So they grow up, they participate in the Olympics, and then they come back and they teach their sport to the next generation. A lot of these, 2 of these men were ski jumpers. So they're now in their mid 50s, and they said ski jumping is not like golf. You can't do it your whole life. But they teach ski jumping, and they are both the 2 most accomplished ski jumpers this country has ever produced. One of them held a world flying record, Mike Holland, and the other, Jeff Hastings, finished 4th in the 1976 Olympics. So they are, in as much as we have had superstars in the sport, they're it. And yet imagine these 2 men every winter during the cross country, or during the ski jumping season, can be found at the high school ski jumping meets, grooming the hills, doing the public address announcing. So again, to the kids in this area, they see, wow, these people are like the Michael Phelps of ski jumping to us. And instead of being these people we put on a pedestal and, oh my gosh, we could never be like them, they are actually going out of their way to make our sports experiences more positive. And that's the community aspect that I think is getting lost too much in youth sports, and then it starts at the elite sport level and has filtered down to youth sports, where we have now treated sports, even at the youth level, as a zero-sum game. So in order, Austin, for you to succeed, I must fail. And in Norwich, like the Santa Clara that I grew up in, that was not the case at all. I saw people reaching out, people who had knowledge and time and experience, reaching out to help those below them to make them better. And in a way, it became this like, it was how you almost developed this feeder system where it wasn't an assembly line, but it sort of felt that way because the people who were at the top helped the people who were at the bottom, and it lifted everybody's performance. And you just don't see that. Even some people said to me, oh, well, Norwich is one of the most affluent towns in Vermont, so how can someone in the inner city relate to this? Well, the principles are the same. And you can argue that in some respects, it's become even harder for people in wealthier communities to avoid this trap of isolation. And you have a kid
Competing.
who shows, Palo Alto, look at a few years ago, The Atlantic did a cover story on why are the teens in Palo Alto killing themselves.
Really?
They had this spate of suicides where kids were jumping in front of the metro rail trains.
Oh my God.
These kids who have every single advantage. Why would they be so, mentally ill and have these problems? Well, this is part of it is if there's this idea that it's all about excellence. So whatever endeavor they take on, they have to be very good at it. So that's a pressure. Then it's all about, well, let's get you the best coaches. Let's take you out of your school and homeschool you so you lose that social connection to your peers. Let's homeschool you so we can send you to a specialized program where you'll get training in the sport that you're good in, or we'll send you away so that you can be immersed fully in the sport that you have shown promise in. And it's just too much too soon, and we're taking kids away from the community that can keep them level-headed and keep them in a positive frame of mind when things go poorly in their sport. That's what I found in Norwich. It's not to say the athletes in Norwich aren't single-minded and really competitive and almost frighteningly so, but the community provides this social safety net. There's one chapter about this mogul skier named Hannah Kearney who won 2 Olympic medals. She won a gold medal in 2010 and a bronze medal in 2014. She was as competitive a person as I've ever come across. So she had that personality, was wired so that she would, left to her own devices, feel as if second place was the first loser. But what saved her is she had a community in Norwich that did not look at it that way at all. And because she played multiple sports through high school, she had developed friendships with people who didn't share this zero-sum game mindset, who weren't that ultra competitive, who had a more holistic view of sports and its place in their lives. So when she would fail, as is inevitable, we all fail. The best athletes fail more than they succeed. She had people who would go, "No, Hannah, you're not a loser because you got second. That's really quite great. And you tried your best. And we're really proud of you for that. And you'll do better next time." So she had voices who were in her ear, countering that voice in her head who was telling her, "Gosh, you're second. What a loser. You might as well just work harder," or, you can get into a healthy, a very unhealthy monologue and dialogue and almost a loop, a feedback loop when you're an elite athlete. And she was really saved from herself by the community that really made sure to remind her of the bigger picture. I just don't see that enough. It was interesting. I was living in Vermont while I was reporting this book when Michael Phelps was arrested for his second DUI. And I just thought, oh my gosh, there couldn't be more of a contrast in the way that Hannah was raised and her athletic journey and Michael's. And obviously Michael has 26 more Olympic medals than Hannah. So crazy. You could say, well, he needed to live a very monastic life to do what he did. But I've had many, many conversations with him since that DUI. Oh, yes. I've done quite a few stories. Just ran a Q&A with him in our paper a couple weeks ago. In fact, last week, because 2 of his world records fell over the summer. But he was saying it took him really going to rehab and spending 6 weeks where he had to really study himself and his vulnerabilities and his weaknesses. And these are things that as athletes, you are told not to pay attention to, that will make you weaker, that will make you less successful. And so you compartmentalize your life to a point where you don't even recognize who you are if you're not an athlete. So Norwich has really provided a blueprint for all of us in terms of, if you come from an affluent family. Hannah Kearney did not come from an affluent family, but she had people in the community who knew that she did not have the financial means to pursue a lot of these national level competitions, and they sponsored her.
Yeah.
You know, people were willing to help those who were less fortunate. They looked for ways. How can I help? Whether it was providing free lunches or, scarves.
Wasn't there like an anonymous sponsor? Isn't that what
she had an anonymous sponsor, yes, who she never met. And I love that piece of the story. And thank you for bringing it up, because nowadays we see people who are generous, but it seems that more often than not, the act of generosity is done so that they can then champion how generous they are. Like, this is really all about them, even as they're helping someone else. And this donor came forward, and he said he wrote to Hannah and said, I will sponsor you under 2 conditions. I want you to send me a report card from every term so that I can see that your athletic competitions and your pursuit of athletic excellence is not affecting your academics, which is far more important in the long run. Yeah. And I also want an itemized budget so that I can see how you're spending the money that I give you. And how wonderful is that? Hannah at the time was barely a teenager, and she is learning at that age the value of $1. Yeah. So she's setting up her travel for a national level competition, for example, and she's looking at hotels. Well, if I stay at the Hampton Inn, it's only $90 a night and I get breakfast. But if I stay at the Marriott, it's $189 and I don't get breakfast. So she's learning at such an impressionable age the value of $1 and how to budget her money. So this man who was making her athletic career and improvement possible was also teaching her these great life lessons. And she said she didn't really appreciate the gift he was giving her about academics is super important, budgeting, knowing what your budget is, budgeting the money that you have, super important. So he was helping her along athletically while really setting the foundation for her to have a successful life afterward.
That's awesome. Yeah, I went on her Instagram, because I think you mentioned in the book, like, she has, I can't remember exactly what it was, ex-Olympian, athlete, and, 30-something-year-old college student, or something like that. So it's funny that... It
was funny. In 2015, she won. So she goes to the Sochi Olympics to defend her 2010 Olympic title. And she finishes 3rd and writes this Facebook post about how this is, the sport broke my heart on this night. And I feel like such a loser. And the town, of course, they read this Facebook post, and they had no plans on doing this, but they all galvanized, and they ended up pulling together in a matter of days a welcome home party for Hannah. And the general store owner, who the motto of the general store is, if we don't have it, you don't need it, which I think is quite a lovely mantra to adopt for life. But it's sort of like that Rolling Stones lyric, you may not get what you want, but you get what you need. So he spoke at this and talked about at this rally and at the center of town, and talked about how proud she had made the whole town, and how not everyone in the town will ever see the world, but she had brought a piece of Norwich to all these different places in the world. And it was really lovely. He showed me his script, so I was able to feel as if I had been there. I had not attended it. It was before the book was even a a twinkle in my eye. But those were gestures like that. None of those people had to do that. They're all busy. A woman who had 4 children under the age of 6 took time to put together a big banner for Hannah. So people really went out of their way, not because they wanted any thanks for it, but because it was what they do for others in their community, knowing that in their time of need, people will do the same for them. And obviously a town of 3,000, that's easier to pull off than a metropolis like where we are today in Phoenix. But I still am a fervent believer that it can be done, but you need a slight change in how you look at your value system. You need a value system that is predicated on community and on a holistic development of a person, and not just on bottom line Olympic excellence or sports excellence. I really was so reminded of Norwich and all it has to teach our country when the college admissions scandal broke, and I saw all of these wealthy parents and the means to which they went to try to get their kids into these prestigious schools, including my alma mater, USC. And I thought, this is so crazy, and they're doing their kids such a disservice. If only they had read Norwich, or a book like Norwich had been around when their kids were young, and they could have realized that the more independence you give your kids and you let them be the ones driving the bus along the path to their destiny, and you just remain in the passenger seat guiding them, the better off they'll be. They'll grow up to be more resilient, more independent, more self-assured people. And that is another lesson that I took from Norwich.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I did a reading for Norwich right after that. The first college admissions, the news started breaking, and I cracked up the room by saying, I really want to know, how can I get Felicity, Felicity Huffman, or a copy of my book? They need to see it. Better late than never. But again, if your whole value system is on just the appearances and getting your kid into what is the most prestigious school,
not healthy.
Right? And I think a lot of the kids have made clear since that it wasn't even their first choice of schools. They would have been much happier somewhere else. I can't remember the name of the author or the title of the book, but someone did a book a few years ago about, if you don't get into the college of your choice, don't worry, you're going to get it. Everything's going to work out. And this man presented his thesis through a number of anecdotal stories about kids who had really wanted to get into Ivy League schools. That had been their Mount Everest, and they fell short and were just so devastated. And so they end up going to their second, third, or fourth schools and end up having the most fantastic experiences, either because they took a class that really ignited their passion and helped them find their direction that they would head as adults, or they made great friends, or they were really inspired by a professor they had, and they got to the other side and realized, wow, why was I so upset about not getting into that, prestigious school? I was so much better off for having gone where I went.
Yeah.
And so I do think that when you are really directed by these principles that are more related to your passion and your values that don't have to do with bottom line success, and you might end up achieving more success in the end without even dwelling on it. But you'll certainly be a happier person, and I would venture to guess a person with fewer mental health issues.
Yeah.
So, which, as we know, is just a growing problem in the United States.
Well, I know you mentioned too, in the beginning of the book, as far as the earlier athletes in Norwich who were in the Olympics, they knew that being an Olympic athlete wasn't necessarily a route to riches, and now, do you think that's a big problem? Where it's that is a part of it, is
that's
becoming a millionaire. That's kind of like a thing.
And so I call it the big lie in Olympic sports is beginning in the 90s, Olympians before then were supposed to be amateurs. So you could not accept any money and compete in the Olympics. So what would happen is you would have stars like Mark Spitz, who I started swimming because of him after watching on TV, watching him win 7 gold medals in 1972. Wow. I said, I want to do that. That looks like a lot of fun. And so that's how I got set on my course. But now there's this expectation that if you win one Olympic gold medal, you're set up financially for life.
Mm-hmm.
Hannah told me she remembered after winning her gold medal in Vancouver, a ski manufacturing rep came up to her and said, "Hannah, you are set for life. Congratulations." And Hannah laughed because she knew already that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
What's happened is, as the number of sports in the Olympics have grown and proliferated, the pie has stayed the same, but now there are fewer pieces for everybody. So instead of more people getting wealthy from their Olympic pursuits, fewer are. And it's really the big lie that everyone who experiences success is going to become financially wealthy. Hannah said that in the lead up to her final Olympics, she actually had to pay for more things because her ski manufacturer stopped making mogul skis, for example, her ski sponsor. So everyone looks at the Lindsey Vonns and the Michael Phelpses and thinks, oh, I'm going to be just like that. But they are really the aberration. They are the exception. They are not the rule. I can tick off dozens of athletes who have won multiple gold medals and are working at Home Depot to supplement their whatever they get from their federations to enable them to continue to compete.
That's crazy. Wow.
It's this big lie that starts when you are a small child and your parents say, well, you know, if you work real hard, you can become an Olympian. And the big lie is also, if you work really hard, you can get a college scholarship and have your college paid for. Well, in the Olympic sports, very few athletes, even the best, get full rides. There are some swim programs who only offer 6 scholarships and they have 18 to 24 people on the team. So you do the math, you know? Yeah. So there's, again, if that's the carrot that you're dangling in front of your child, you're setting them up for failure and you're setting them up for disappointment. So my suggestion, and what the parents in Norwich have done extraordinarily well, they've created Olympians, but not by dangling the Olympics as the carrot, but dangling, you can do this sport, or you can find whatever it is that really you have a passion for, whether it's music or, you know, being in theater or sports, and you can develop self-confidence and life skills like discipline, delayed gratification, being coachable, having persistence, perseverance, all of these great skills that will help you in whatever you do after you're done playing your sport. And by focusing on process and all of these little goals that are very personal, they've managed to produce what the people dangling the Olympics want for their children, but in a completely different way. And by focusing on turning the focus from the results to the process and the journey of self-discovery, it's just a much healthier path to go down.
Do you see, like, when parents are like that, when they're more like focused on their child being super successful and whatever it is, do you think that's more like parents trying to live through their children when you see that?
I really do. I think a lot of it, again, let's be clear, there is not a parent I know that sets out to make an activity that their child loves a miserable experience. So the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so I think what happens is most parents go in and they're so happy to see that their child has found an interest separate from, you know, maybe their own interests, or maybe their children has adopted the same interests that hobby that they really love. And so it starts out very healthy, but if their child has any kind of success, They spend a lot of time around other parents who are talking about the value of getting college scholarships and, my Johnny is going to go to this school on a college scholarship. What about your Jane? And it becomes sort of another competition within the larger competition, which is their child's sport. And very gradually, the parents get sucked into this very competitive atmosphere where they feel like, oh, well, I've got to try to give my child every advantage so that they can keep up with the Joneses and their child. And it's this endless circle that burns everybody out. The parents are running around constantly on the weekends for these travel teams, and it's a 52-week-a-year proposition, and the kids don't have any time to just exhale, and they don't have 5 minutes to decompress. So everybody ends up miserable in the end. And to what end? What is the greater good that's being served by doing that and being that way? There was this skier at the 2018 Winter Olympics who I covered, Esta Ledeca, and she actually won a gold medal in the alpine skiing and then won a gold medal in a different skiing discipline. And this was considered historic because you really don't go from one discipline to another. You don't go from snowboarding to alpine skiing. You concentrate on one or the other. And so I asked her, did you have many coaches growing up who told you couldn't do both? And she said, oh, all the time. From the time I started alpine skiing, I was told I couldn't do any other sports.
Really?
The snowboard coaches told me I couldn't do alpine skiing. I said, well, so what did you do? And she said, I found different coaches.
Oh, nice.
So there is a road. You don't have to follow the herd. You don't have to get on this treadmill that is exhausting. You can have the courage of your convictions that that's not the right path and follow your own path and find people out there. It's as you said, I think there are a lot of people in our society now who are looking for a different way. They're exhausted by this constant rat race and searching for the success and in the very narrowest terms, and want a more holistic existence, want to be able to have a dinner where everyone is present and around the table and not on their phones and having a normal human conversation. But it just seems impossible because of this professionalized sports youth complex, as I call it, that has sprung up. And J.J. Watt, the very fine Houston Texans football player, a couple falls ago, he tweeted out of the blue, don't let anyone tell you your child needs to specialize. Anyone who says that doesn't have your child's best interest at heart. He's coming at it organically. He played hockey and basketball and football growing up all through high school. And what I would advise any parent to do before, when they have a child and a coach says to them, your child is very gifted, they could make the Olympics, they could get a college scholarship, they could become a pro, but they need this specialized coaching. I would say to that parent, think about it. Who has your child's best interests at heart, you or that coach? That coach is looking at your child, however well-intentioned he or she might be. At the end of the day, they're getting money from providing this service for your child. You, on the other hand, have your child's best interests at heart. So when people come up to you and say you have to homeschool your kids so that they can get more training in their sport, or you have to send your kid to the other side of the country to get specialized training, or your kid can't play 2 sports, or your kid must be part of this traveling team, ask yourself, does that person have my kid's best interests at heart, or are they gaining money from my child? Are they looking to financially benefit from my child? Do they have an ulterior motive that is not my child's best interests?
You tell me if I'm wrong too, but it seems like to me that I've seen where like coaches will, like you said, they'll want the best of the best, but they'll want that almost for like their reputation, because
Exactly.
they've trained, you could say, I've trained, these people, and that's
Exactly.
part of like your whole.
And you're exactly right. In fact, on the national level, at least in swimming, you have a situation where if a coach places a swimmer on the Olympic team, that coach gets a bonus. So
Really?
they definitely have an ulterior
Financial,
motive
yeah.
for pushing you past what is perhaps sensible and healthy in order to get that bottom line success. It benefits everybody in the short term. And I just think the country that did the best at the 2018 Olympics was Norway.
Okay.
It's a country that with a population equal to that of Greater Detroit.
Okay.
So how does this small country kick everybody's butts in the Olympics? Well, they have a sports system set up where you're never going to read a story in Norway about the best 10-year-old cross-country skier. They do not emphasize results at that age, and they do not, if you have a 10-year-old who is extraordinary in cross-country skiing, they are not going to be put into a group with older kids who have their same skill set. They are going to be put in age-appropriate groups. So they are going to be training with kids who aren't as good as they are, but are the same age. The whole purpose of that is to build social connections and friendships. Sports at that level, in the preteen stage, Norway believes, is all about gaining technical skill and forming friendships. So then when they get to be 13, that's when the winnowing process begins. If you're really good, you'll be sent to a group that with others that share your skill. But their goal is for people to have their peak performance years be between 17 and 27.
Okay.
The way our system is set up, kids are having their peak performance between 7 and 17 and are completely burned out by the time they get to college, if they even make it that far.
Wow.
Numerous studies have been done. Any of your listeners can look it up on the internet that 70% of kids who start sports before the age of 10 are out of that sport by 13.
70%?
70%, either through injury, the sport just isn't fun, they're pushed too hard, too fast. So think about that. Do we really want that, where kids are not even out of high school and they're already adopting a sedentary lifestyle? They're done with that high intensity competitive atmosphere.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It is crazy.
Did you see the documentary Icarus?
I did. It
What do
really
you think about
touches
that?
on a lot of these themes. Well, it touches on this idea that there are people who will honestly do anything for the bottom line, for this very narrow vision of success. And one of the reasons that I wrote the Norwich book is, in the last 20 years, especially as I'm out and about interviewing athletes of all ages from all sports and their parents, I've seen a disturbing trend where even parents of young kids tell me, oh, my kid's going to be the next Katie Ledecky, or my kid's going to be the next LeBron James. And I'm thinking, wow, all right, so what if your kid grows up and, heaven forbid, does not become the next Katie Ledecky or LeBron James? What if your kid grows up, for example, to be a lot like me? I was a walk-on swimmer at USC, so I didn't get a college scholarship. I never made a national team. I never made an Olympic team. Are you going to look at that child as a failure? Are you going to, however subtly, convey to that child, wow, your childhood was a massive waste of time and I'm really disappointed in you? Because that would break my heart, Austin, because when I look back on my childhood, I have nothing but the fondest memories of my sports participation. So even though I didn't hit any of my big pie in the sky goals, I learned so many wonderful skills that have set me up beautifully for my professional life. Discipline, perseverance, persistence. I'll always go the extra mile to do whatever it takes to get a story. I'm not, roadblocks, obstacles do not fluster me. I just have all of these skills that I absolutely learned from 11 years of swimming. Not only that, I developed friendships in those years between 9 and 21 that to this day, these people are members of my inner circle. So you look at us now and you think, what on earth do you people have in common? How can you be such good friends? On the surface of it, we're leading completely different lives, but those bonds that we formed during swimming have withstood the test of time. And to me, these are really important things that you get out of sport that just do not get talked about enough because we're too busy having the conversation about college scholarships and pro contracts and Olympic medals. But in my mind, as I get older and older and farther removed from my sporting self, these are the qualities that I took from the sport that are far more meaningful to me. That I have these skills, that I have this resilience, that I have this persistence, that I have this discipline, that I have this inner circle of friends that I know I can count on. They're my social network. They're my support system. They're my safety net.
So do you think it's more, because like you said, not everybody's going to live in, a town like Norwich where you're living in this small, tight-knit community. Do you think, more for people, if you are an athlete and you're shooting for whatever the goal is, to also focus maybe on, maybe finding out more about yourself and not putting so much pressure on yourself to get that end result? Or
I can give you a couple. There's always someone who could use your help. Even when I was 10 and 11, there were kids, I taught swim lessons to kids who are just learning to float.
Really?
So in my mind, there's always someone that you can reach out to and help. And I didn't do that because I was, a person of high character. I did that because I saw everybody else in my community doing the same. And I was just parroting what everybody else did. So that is what happens when you have people who are really other directed and giving. Everybody kind of falls in line behind that. I have this great origin story that I tell in the book that if I can just share it with your listeners. So this is why I make every effort to give back. And I think that when we think about people giving back and doing for others, we think of the grand gestures. We think of Bill and Melinda Gates giving billions of dollars to schools, or we think, you must have to have a lot of wealth or have a lot of some resource to be able to do these grand gestures. But my life changed on some very simple gestures of generosity. When I was in 8th grade, I was assigned an English project to make your own magazine. And I was so excited because I already loved to write, and I thought, for sure, I'm going to do this swimming magazine. And my dad said, well, who are you going to interview for it? Well, I was the shyest 13-year-old on the planet. I could have never done what I'm doing now with you at 13.
Really?
I could barely answer the phone. These were the days of rotary phones. And when the phone would ring, we would have to answer it. Crouse residence, who is this? And
That's
I could
hilarious.
barely work up the courage to answer a phone. So I said to my dad, there is no way I can interview anyone. I'm going to just make up an interview. And he said, no, you should interview Mike Brunner. Well, Mike Brunner was a swimmer on my team who was the Michael Phelps of his day. He was extraordinary talented in butterfly, freestyle, IM. He was supposed to make the 76 Olympic team in multiple events. And he was considered a god to those of us who were young on this team. He was as unapproachable gets. And this was the age of men wearing mullets and, the feathered hair, and he was bald.
It's coming back.
Yeah, well, that's too bad. But so are bell bottoms. So what can I say? He was way ahead of Michael Jordan and, shaving his head completely, which just made him look more intimidating to those of us who were young and impressionable. So I said to my dad, there is no way on earth that I can talk to Mike Brenner. I can't even imagine that. I'm getting nervous just thinking about it. And he said, no, I think you really need to do this. So he took me to practice and made me go and talk to the head coach of the team, this wonderful man named Bill Rose. And he said, Karen, tell Coach Rose what your project is. So I told Coach Rose I'm supposed to interview someone for a magazine that I'm creating. And so my dad thinks that I should interview Mike Brenner. And I'm thinking the whole time, please say no, please say no. And Coach Rose, God bless him, he said, okay, Karen, you come back tomorrow with your questions ready, and I'll make sure that Mike speaks to you. So I found this out years later. Mike did not know that a person from his team was interviewing him. Coach Rose said to him simply that night, Mike, you need to stay for an interview after practice, so just plan accordingly. So Mike, not unreasonably, thought that someone from the San Jose Mercury or San Francisco Chronicle or maybe even Sports Illustrated was in town to talk to him. He certainly didn't expect to walk out of the tunnel from the locker room and see, this very nervous, skinny little girl shaking like a leaf and pigtails still wet from swim practice. But I was there with my 3.5x5 cards, and he was so lovely. If he was mortified,
Really?
He certainly didn't show it. He acted as if this was the most natural thing in the world, that he would sit down with this little girl and do this interview. And so we did the interview. I did the magazine. I got an A on it. And so as luck would have it, the Olympic trials were in Long Beach that year, and they were right after the grading period for this magazine came out. So my dad said, well, he had gotten us tickets to go to the Olympic trials, and he said, you need to take Mike and Coach Rose, you need to make them copies of this magazine and show them what their hard work led to. That's the least you can do, which was actually a great piece of journalism advice that I adhere to this day. So I made copies of it, and we go down to Long Beach. We arrive after Mike has already swum his first 2 events, and he has done poorly. He made the Olympic team in the 200 freestyle, but as a relay member only. He did not make the individual event. So he's already starting to talk down his expectations. He had gone into the trials thinking he might be able to win as many, make an Olympic team in as many as 5 events, possibly win 5, set himself up for 5 medals. He's now talked himself all the way down to, well, I've already made the Olympic team as a 800 freestyle relay member, so I'm guaranteed a gold pretty much in that. So that's not nothing. So he's really scaled down his expectations. He's in a pretty bad place. He swims the 400 free, doesn't even make the team.
Oh, wow.
So into this environment, my dad and I arrive with my copies of Splash magazine.
Oh.
So I get on the pool deck, something that would never happen in the year 2020, which is the next swimming Olympics. And I give Coach Rose, I go, Coach Rose, look, I got an A. Here's a copy of the magazine for you and Mike. Now, this is the most pressure-packed meet. Every 4 years, this is it. Careers are made and deflated in this 1 week. And Coach Rose certainly had a lot on his mind. Reading Splash magazine was not high on his list of priorities. But instead of taking the magazine and just patting me on the head and waiting till I left and putting him down and never looking at it, Coach Rose started reading the Q&A I did with Mike right there as I stood there. And he gets to this one part and he says, Karen, this is fantastic. I am going to have Mike read this right now. Wow. And I said, oh, okay. I have no clue what's going on. I don't know that Mike is really sulking about how his trials is going to this point. So I found this out years later. Coach Rose takes the magazine and he does go find Mike who's getting ready for his best event, the 200 fly. And he says, Mike, I want you to read this aloud to me. And he has him read one of the answers he had given me in the Q&A aloud, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And it was in response to a question that only an insecure 13-year-old can ask, that went basically, what do you do when the big event comes and you are supposed to swim fast and you don't feel good in the water? How do you manage to swim well and forget that how poorly you feel? And Mike had given an answer basically saying, I know that I work harder than anybody else, and so I trust that that hard work is going to pay off. And so no matter how I feel at that point, it's a mental game, and I know that no one should be stronger mentally than I am because I've put in more work than anyone. So that's the answer that Coach Rose has Mike read. So Mike goes out, he wins the 200 fly that night. So afterward, a reporter from the Long Beach Press-Telegram asks him, Mike, your meet got off to a bit of a rocky start, but you really turned it around tonight. What was the difference? So, to this point, my life is what it is. It could have gone in any direction, but how Mike chose to answer this changed the course of my life. He said, well, there's a little girl on my team and she interviewed me, and my coach made me read the interview before I swam, and it got me in a positive frame of mind, and that's why it enabled me to swim fast. So luckily the reporter used that quote.
Really?
And so the next day I arrive at the pool, and Coach Rose and the other swimmers are all excited, and they said, Karen, did you see? You're in the newspaper. So my dad goes out and buys the Long Beach Press-Telegram, and we come back and we read the story. And when I saw that quote, my mind was blown, because here I was, someone who was so shy, and I had already thought that sports writing would be a grand way to spend my life,
Really?
but I didn't think I had the wiring for it. When I watched movies and television shows where journalists were portrayed, they were all super aggressive and shouting and, banging on doors of strangers, and none of these things I could imagine ever doing. I was so shy, I couldn't even answer the phone in our house hardly. But Mike, his quote showed me I already did it. And I did it in a way that this God, this person I looked up to more than anyone else besides my parents, I had helped him by something I wrote. That's crazy. It was so empowering and so impactful. And I remember saying to my dad right then and there on the deck, Dad, I want to grow up to do this for a living. I want to tell people's stories and have a positive impact on people's lives. And from that moment forward, my life path was set. There's a couple funny postscripts to this. So Mike does go to Montreal. He wins the 200 fly. He is the first American gold medal winner of those Olympics. So he gets a call from President Ford.
Wow, that's crazy.
Then he comes back, goes to college at Stanford. I go to high school. I completely lose touch with him. In 2006, shortly after I had begun writing for the New York Times, I get this reader email. It begins, you probably don't remember me, but you must be Karen Crouse from De Anza Swim Club. This is Mike Brunner, and I just want to tell you that whenever I'm asked to talk about my Olympics, I always talk about your magazine and how your Q&A helped my dreams come true. Wow. And I'm so happy to see you working at the New York Times, because that means your dreams came true too. And it made me cry. It was just such a great win-win circle that my dad put me outside my comfort zone, and Coach Rose was generous enough to see that this was something that would be nice for Mike to do. Mike was nice enough to be gracious and do it. And it ends up, these little simple acts of generosity changed my life, changed Mike's life. And it's just super cool. So Then a few years pass, and I'm telling our Olympic editor this story, which I really hadn't shared to this point much. I don't know why. I just, for whatever reason, it didn't seem that meaningful to anyone but me. And when I got done telling the story, the Olympics editor says, you need to write this story. This is an extraordinary story, especially this was in 2012 when the contraction of newspapers and jobs was just beginning. And so there was this pall hanging over our profession. So this was the feel-good story, the ray of light to cut through all of that, the darkening clouds. So I write this story. I get another reader email from a woman who I had been best friends with in 8th grade. She said, Karen, I read your Mike Bruner story with great interest. It was a fun story, but I just wanted to tell you that I remember that assignment vividly because you were so into it, but it was an extra credit assignment.
Really?
Extra credit. So think about that for a moment, that my entire life changed on an extra credit assignment. And I was such a nerd. I was such an academic nerd growing up that I absolutely did not need to do extra credit. Yeah. So that's what I just, I'm teaching a class at ASU this fall in sports writing. And I told the class yesterday, this is reason number one why you should always go the extra mile, because you never know, that extra effort you put in may literally change your life.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing to be that young and to find like
I'm
a
so
passion.
blessed because I thought that was normal. And then I get to college and find out kids who don't know what to major in. And then I get out of college and find people that, still are sort of trying to figure out what they want to do, what their passion is. And believe me, I totally know how much of an aberration my story is and how completely lucky I am that I found my passion so young.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I know that, the journalism industry is going through a lot of changes and kind of a lot of under attack from a lot of different people. But like for you, throughout your career, like navigating that industry, and I know you have said that you're one of the few like female, sports reporters. Like, would you have any advice to people that are interested in getting into?
Well, I feel as if there's always going to be a place for news gatherers and for storytelling. And so I don't know what shape that will take. Obviously, the path I took doesn't even really exist anymore, where you start at a small paper covering high schools. Then you go to a bigger paper covering high schools. Then maybe you go to a bigger paper covering something else and work your way up. That path just does not exist anymore. So I do believe fervently that there's always going to be a place for truth tellers and storytellers and news gatherers. And so if that's your passion, if you have a curiosity about the world, if you love to write, if you love to tell people's stories, if you love to learn about things you don't know about and then impart that knowledge to others, journalism is the best profession. And I always tell people that there are very few days, and I've been doing this for almost 40 years now, there are very few days in the real working world where I feel they're as hard or as stressful as the typical day was for me as a student athlete in high school and college, juggling classes and academics, which was really important to me, and swimming, which was really important to me. So I'm not saying that my adulthood has been easy or that I haven't had many challenges thrown in my path, but because of my athletic training, I feel very well equipped to handle it, and I'm pretty organized and everything feels manageable to me. And I owe that 100% to all those years spent juggling swimming and school. I also love journalism because no 2 days are ever the same. And I don't have, it's a little like walking a tightrope. Some days you wake up and you have to write, but you don't know at all what you're going to end up writing.
Really?
Yes. I'll give you a perfect example. So I cover golf for the paper now. And I was at the tour championship last week, and they had actually told me, why don't you not write on Saturday? We don't need a story. We don't have room for a story. So you don't need to write for Saturday. Well, there are probably people who wouldn't have even shown up to the course. But I thought, well, I'll take advantage of this. I'll go and I'll walk with someone that I don't normally get to watch play, or I'll walk outside the ropes with the parents or wife or of a player and get to know more about them through a conversation. So that's what I did. And so then I came back in the press room and was looking at some notes, and the play was suspended because of weather moving into the area. And sure enough, about a half hour after the suspension of play, there was a thunderclap that was so loud it made the entire building shake.
Wow.
And it sounded, one person described it as a sonic boom, and that's exactly what it sounded like. So I walk out to see, wow, what's going on here? And I'm calling my husband to just tell him about it. And while I'm on the phone with him looking out at the course, 3 ambulances go rushing by. Wow. So I say to him, I got to go. And I just start heading out in the direction of the ambulances. And there were 6 people injured in the lightning strikes,
really?
Not
Wow,
hit by lightning, but injured by debris from pine trees that were struck by the lightning, or just hurt. So I ended up having a story, and it turned out that this is so crazy, but I had bought a burger at a concession stand earlier that day, and one of the injured people was the man who had flipped my burger and who I had talked to briefly. So I was able to identify him. I asked him, like, what happened, and get a quote. So again, that was a day I woke up not even thinking I was going to write, and ended up doing what was a pretty newsy story. So I love that. It's taken a while. I'm wired where, I was that person in school that would have a research paper done 2 weeks before it was due. But now I'm learning to enjoy that.
That spontaneity.
Yeah, that tightrope walking act. So
are you going to be covering future Olympics?
I am down to cover Tokyo. I
Really?
usually do swimming the first week of it, and then
that's awesome.
Then the rest of the time I just do go wherever I'm needed. But so I really love it. As someone, that's another thing I love to tell kids who I grew up wanting to be an Olympian, never made it as a competitor, but I've covered every Summer Olympics since 1992 and every Winter Olympics since 2006. So I've gone to more Olympics than Michael Phelps as a journalist, and it's been tremendously rewarding.
That's crazy. Yeah. Have you seen in that time, have you seen any noticeable changes as far as like, I know, like you said, the money has gotten into it.
The money, yeah.
Are they trying to like
the money's gotten into it to the point where, you have people who they make an Olympic team and they're looking like, well, now shouldn't I get rich? I'm an Olympian. Yeah. And I think the Olympics, and this is not there's no judgment attached to this observation, that because there's now money to be made, I think people are sticking, at least in swimming, sticking with the sport far longer than they might otherwise have. When I was growing up, the people that I looked up to at 9, 10, and 11, they didn't even have a college team to swim for. If they were a woman, there was no college swimming for them. So they were done effectively after high school. Then I was the first wave of people for whom, if you were a woman, you could swim or compete in college. But then most of my peers, all of my peers, quit swimming by the end of college. Now you have a lot of top level swimmers who are swimming into their late 20s, early 30s, and they're able to make a living, not a great living in most cases, but obviously they're able to support themselves enough to keep doing it. But I sort of feel that they're undervaluing the lessons and the skills that they have, they could be segueing into their next career and doing far better, relatively speaking, than they are as an Olympian. But I think once you make an Olympic team, it's addictive. You want to experience it again and again. I can't blame them for that.
Well, even in the beginning of the book, I was like shocked at the quote that you had in there as far as like when the Olympics first started versus the amount of coverage that they put out was crazy.
Yeah, the first Norwich Olympian was a skier, Betsy Snight, and she was in the 56 and 60 Olympics. And the 60 Olympics were in Squaw Valley, and they were the first Olympics televised live in the United States. And I think it was less than 20 hours coverage, the entire Olympics. So
that's manageable.
You can that's manageable. So when you look at it that way, now every event is shown through all these different platforms. And when you think of 13 to 20 hours of coverage, not a lot of stars are being made or introduced to the audience in that amount of time. But now you have all of this coverage, and so a lot of people are getting airtime, and so they're looking to monetize that. You know who I am now, so pay me.
Yeah.
So that's what's created this sort of celebrity culture in sports that previously a celebrity culture did not exist.
I wonder if in the future if they're going to try to the Olympics, if they're going to try to get back to their roots as far as
the problem is TV and corporate sponsors are all about money and making money and the bottom line. So that's been, I think, part of the problem. So what happened is, okay, now all of a sudden the athletes are on TV more. So then sponsors take note and say, wow, so I'm trying to get America to eat Wheaties. What better way to get America to eat Wheaties than to find this person who we just got through watching win all these gold medals, sign them to hawk Wheaties. So that's how it starts. The TV came first, then the sponsors saw, like, I can turn these athletes into endorsers for my product and get TV time. Think about, I can put a patch saying Kellogg's right on their
chest.
Sweat. Or on their sweat jacket or their chest, and the whole world will see Wheaties or Kellogg's and be reminded of our products. That's how it starts. Now it's just that idea on steroids, where now there's so many hours of TV and so many people that are whose exploits are being shown. And so people, all these corporate entities are thinking, I can get into the game here. And not everyone is getting a lot of money, but you can get just enough money, perhaps, that it's seductive. Ooh, well, maybe I should keep going, when really you're better off segueing into your next part of your life. Hannah Kearney is a perfect example of this. The year after she won the bronze in 2014, she had one of her best years. She won the season-long World Cup, which it identifies the best person in her discipline over the course of a season. So many of her competitors said, that's great, Hannah. You should just keep competing for 3 more years and go to the 2018 Olympics. You're at the top of your game, literally. And she said, no. I could keep competing, but that would be, at this point, the easy thing. Competing in moguls is my comfort zone, but I'm almost 30. I need to get out of my comfort zone. Because if sports taught me anything, it's that the magic happens where your comfort zone ends. So I need to get out of my comfort zone. I need to get out of the sport. I need to finish college. I'm a 28-year-old sophomore in college. All my peer group has 10 years of business or workplace experience on me. And so she retired at the top of her game 3 years before an Olympic set. Everybody whose very narrow view of success is Olympic excellence or sporting excellence, she blew their minds. They couldn't understand her motivation at all, and went back and finished her degree and is now working as a nutritionist and working with teaching kids, I think doing personal training. But, she was smart enough, again, because of the value system that she had grown up with in Norwich, to realize just because I can keep doing this at a high level doesn't mean I should. At some point, it's time for me to put myself outside my comfort zone in some other endeavor and use all of the skill set that I've developed and the life lessons I've developed to do something else and be happy doing something else.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Does the New York Times, do they cover any gaming, like sports gaming?
We're actually, I think we were looking to hire someone whose discipline would be that full time, because we recognize that is a really big part of sports right now.
Yeah.
It's an emerging entity that we should have on our radar.
It's crazy.
It is crazy.
How big it is.
But it's crazy that it's already developing some of the problems that we see elsewhere with people looking to either cheat or, taking just all these different paths that, again, when your value system is very narrowly outlined as success or nothing, and your definition of success is being the best or winning the most money or whatever, problems ensue invariably.
Yeah. Would you ever write another book?
I definitely would love to write another book. I got a very valuable piece of advice from a multiple time author who told me, asked me how the book experience had been, and I told him overwhelmingly positive. And he said, well, here's my advice to you. Do not jump into a second project just because you so enjoyed the first project, because what the danger is in doing that is that you will get halfway through this project and realize, maybe this isn't really a book, but now I'm too invested. I've got to keep going, and it will turn into a joyless march to the finish. Just really wait and identify something that you are as passionate about as you were Norwich, and then you'll know you have your second project.
Okay.
So that's what I'm in the process of doing. Yes.
Do you live in Phoenix?
I do live in Phoenix. I have gamed every system. I identified my passion early, which was completely gaming the system of life. I get to work for this fabulous newspaper, but I don't have to live in New York, which is not really my comfort zone. So I feel like I've got the best of both worlds.
Could you see yourself ever moving to like a smaller town?
Well, I did live in Norwich for a while reporting the book. I absolutely could. In fact, I had never even stepped foot in Vermont before I started reporting the book. And by the end of it,
That's where Bernie Sanders is from.
I know. I was
Shout out Bernie Sanders.
How could I should have gotten Bernie a copy of the book. Maybe he'll be listening. Bernie, buy the book. And then talk about it. So,
that's hilarious.
I fell in love with Vermont. I definitely could see myself in a smaller town. But what I love I've worked in LA, I've worked in New York, I've lived in New York for 6 years, now live in Phoenix, which is fastly becoming one of the top 5 cities in the country population-wise. Every big city develops its own communities. So even within that big city, there are subsets of people where you develop your own smaller communities within the bigger city. So I think every big city, there are a bunch of small towns contained in that big city. And I really think the lessons of Norwich can be applied to Phoenix. There are plenty of really wealthy people, philanthropists, looking for ways, how can I help my community? How can I help people who are less fortunate? How can I help? I have a lot to offer just about in the journalism end and in inspiring people to pay it forward, because I was the benefactor or the beneficiary of other people's generosity. We all can do a little more to make where we live a better place for everybody. And no one has to, I don't understand this idea that I need to collect all the wealth so that you have none of it. I need to collect all the resources so that you have none of it. When is enough enough?
Exactly. That's what I always wonder whenever I see people that are worth like billions of dollars.
Right.
It's like, holy shit, you already have bought like everything that you could possibly buy.
Right.
So it must just be like an ego thing from
And
then
it's
on
funny
out.
because you see some of these people who are supremely wealthy, and they're some of the most miserable people.
Yeah.
And what you can only conclude from that is that possessions does not bring happiness.
Yeah.
More possessions do not equal more happiness.
Yeah.
Leading a meaningful life is the key to happiness. Finding your passion, acting on it, helping others, being other directed. That to me is, I found in Norwich, the path to happiness and contentment and meaningful lives.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow, sweet. All right, well, I think that's probably a good place to end it there.
All right.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you
I'm
so much
appreciative,
for this
man.
time and platform. It means the world to me.
I
Thank you.
definitely recommend anybody listening to read this book, Norwich. Like I said, I'm not a sports person at all, and I genuinely really did enjoy reading it.
It really is the story of the town told through the story of certain individuals. I picked a handful of Olympians. It was really interesting. One last thing about the book. When I was writing it, my initial chapters, I got so invested and involved in the individual Olympian stories. My first couple chapters read like very long profiles of each person. And my editor at Simon Schuster gave me the best piece of advice. She said, Karen, I'm going to give you these chapters back with this one thought. Every page you write about Norwich is the main character. So everything you write about the athletes of Norwich, it should be how they represent a certain quality or characteristic of Norwich. Never forget that Norwich is the main character. And as soon as I did that, I was on my way. And so these athletes represent, the resilience, the community, all of these great value systems that were deeply rooted in this community. And again, I think too often now we've been fed this narrative that it's either or. Either you can live a well-balanced life and you can be other-directed, or you can be fabulously successful and be an Olympian, a pro athlete, get a college scholarship, be the best at what you do. But the two cannot coexist. And that was the greatest lesson of all that I took from Norwich, is that actually they can coexist quite nicely, and do in this small Vermont town. These people are not sacrificing any of these bigger picture qualities, values, to pursue this very singular goal of athletic excellence.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Karen Crouse, thank you very much.
Whoa.